Well, welcome to the final day of the Fellowship of Former Christian Scientists virtual conference. Why is Christian Science still influencing my faith? Here we are at the finish line. It has been just such a great weekend, and it probably feels a little bit like a marathon, but I have to say this is the day we've been waiting for, the days when we get to talk about tools for recovery. And I'm just really excited to hear more from the Pardons, and they just have some really great ideas for us. I really hope that this is not the end of your journey. I hope that this is just the next step. And that you continue to walk with us. So do reach out. We'd love to connect you with Christ-centered resources, care, and community. Again, it's just been so great to walk together and just engage in this together all weekend. Thank you for the ways that you have participated and shared your life and heart with us through the small group discussions and asking great questions in the chat, and all weekend long just walking together in recovery. So thanks again, and I wanted to ask Chris Smith to come and share a couple final words with you today.
Hey folks, we're almost at the finish line. You've had a great weekend, I hope, and we're almost there. I want to stop and just say thank you for participating this weekend. It's been great to have all of you come and be a part of this conference. You've all hopefully learned something, but you've all offered something as well as you've shared with one another, and we really appreciate that. You know, Friday night when I talked to you, I was encouraging you to take some time during the conference to be able to slow down and pause occasionally and reflect, to collect your thoughts, to think about and process what it is that you were learning and going through. And I don't know whether you've been able to do that or not. It's been a pretty full schedule, but I'm going to lean on you one more time that as the conference comes to an end after this last session, I really want to encourage you to do that, to stop and take a few moments to sit quietly so that you can harvest some of the insights and that you can process some of the questions that you are dealing with. Asking questions of yourself like, how is this weekend affecting me? What is faith? What is it that I believe? I really think that time spent in reflection over questions like that will be valuable and worthwhile. So I encourage you just one final time to reflect. And as I do that, it causes me to stop and reflect on what it takes to pull off a conference like this. And for you, it might just be you turn on your computer, you hit the link, and it all just happens magically. But as you know, it's not quite that simple. It's taken over a dozen people producing content all over the place, recording audio, video, and sending it and having it all technologied so that you can see it. And in addition to that, it's taken all kinds of blood, sweat, and tears. I know Katie has put in hundreds of hours, even just in the last couple of weeks, to make this conference go smoothly and happen for you. I'd be remiss if we didn't thank Katie for all that she's done. But as I think about that and all that has to happen to make the conference happen, I want to encourage you that if you found that this conference and the Fellowship of Former Christian Scientists in general has been helpful and beneficial to you, and you feel like you want to give back, I encourage you to think about supporting the ministry of FFCS. This conference takes about $5,000 to run. And although you know that we're happy to give scholarship, we do that freely, and we never turn someone away because of financial reasons. But we do have to pay for this conference and the other seminars that we run and so forth. And so we just want to invite you to do that if you'd like to. It's been a great weekend. We're grateful for your participation. And it's a joy, and I know it'll be a treat for you to hear one last time from Bob and Judy Pardon.
Okay, we want to welcome you to the last workshop that we're having as part of this Fellowship of Former Christian Scientists virtual conference. And now we want to talk about recovering authentic faith. Why is it important? And as we have had opportunity to speak over the last couple of days, we've talked about what faith is. We've talked about being manipulated by a destructive group and how common that is across many venues. And then we talked about how Mary Baker Eddy was incredibly manipulative, being a narcissistic personality disorder. And now we are looking at the last segment, which is recovering what faith actually is when it is authentic, and why that is important. So I ask you, are you okay? Yeah, I'm just tired. Well, if you look at tired, the acronym for tired is torn apart, insecure, really faking my smile, extremely sad, and drowning in my tears. Somebody that comes out of Christian Science, if they don't feel this way at times, then there's something wrong. Because you can't leave a group like that and be unscarred from it. So what is authentic faith? What is authentic trust? So let's kind of just review here what we looked at in our first session.
We're dealing with belief in a biblical Christianity or religion is often portrayed as blind, anti-rational, anti-intellectual, unscientific. The average person thinks that it's all of those things. The implication is that faith is a blind hope that something is real. It is the opposite of a fact-based, repeatable experimentation.
Now, it's important to understand the difference between pure science and scientism. One is based upon empirical evidence and observation. The other is filled with philosophical assumptions. Okay, so we've talked about this in our first session. Science essentially is based upon observing the visible universe and running certain observations and experimentations to gain an understanding of what is happening, not necessarily why it is happening, nor necessarily how it is happening, but what is happening. It might include those two, but not necessarily. Scientism, on the other hand, has philosophical assumptions. Scientism essentially says, we are the source of all knowledge. We are the ones who are able to really understand this universe and all that there is. So, trust or faith in any person, belief, or thing actually consists of three components that are important to identify. Three Latin words have been used to identify these three components. One is notitia, or knowledge. There is a sensus, or assent. This is where you essentially believe it to be true. And then fiducia, or trust. Those are critical components of any individual's faith.
So knowledge, this is the person, belief, or object that is actually believed in based on the study of information such as historical documentation, eyewitness accounts, and/or experimentation. Knowledge is made up of factual evidence, circumstantial evidence, and multiple eyewitnesses. So if you have knowledge, you've looked at it, you've tracked it down back to the factual evidence, you see the facts, even circumstances would adhere to this, and the multiple eyewitness can attest to it.
Then you've got assent or a census, and these build upon each other. So you've got the knowledge first of something, then there's the assent. It's not enough to just know something, some person, belief, or thing. Your assent is the conviction that the knowledge is true, that this is true knowledge. Now, after that then comes trust. Trust takes the knowledge that is assented to, that is believed, and incorporates it into a complete reliance or dependence. This is a worldview. So you meet somebody that is going to be your beloved, you fall in love with this individual, you have knowledge, you believe, of their character, and you believe that that knowledge is accurate. If the relationship develops into something romantic, then there is trust at a deep level where the two of you get married. So it's based upon these three things. And we just automatically go through all of this. It's not something that we really think about. And if you remember in our first session, we talked about the difference between, or not the difference so much, but really what faith and probability are. They really are kind of two sides of the same coin, because every decision we make in this life is based upon probability. So if you remember, we gave the example of if 50% of the time you sat on a chair and it let you down and it collapsed underneath you, then the next time that you come across a chair that you are going to trust with your weight, it would be important for you to have knowledge of this chair's stability. Is it something that is solid? Does it look solid? You might pick it up and put it down. You might try to twist it a little bit. Then if you come to have that knowledge that it is real, then if you believe that knowledge, that this is actually something that is going to hold my weight, then you may trust it. You may sit on it then. And that is, in a sense, showing your full faith in that chair.
It's important to realize that all humans, indeed, it is the essence of being human, operate with some faith system, either explicit or implicit, known or unknown, thought through or not thought through. And most people don't think about their faith system, if you want to use that term, why they do the things that they do.
And you know, one of the problems that I know Judy and I have experienced in the church, because we're both committed Christians, is that you can run into many churchgoers, many people who claim to know Christ as their Lord and Savior, who essentially really don't know what they believe. And if they can articulate what it is that they believe, they really can't defend it. They can't tell you why they believe this and not that. So faith is a huge issue in terms of having the knowledge, having the assent, and then having the trust in order to be able to stand upon it. Because otherwise, it is going to be something that is really illusory for you.
Well, I guess because there is such a thing as blind faith, where people don't bother to have the knowledge. They don't check it out. They don't try to find the factual evidentiary piece of all of it. Nor do they say, okay, now that I have that, what about the circumstantial evidence? Do I have that to back up what I believe and what my faith is placed in? And then finally, are there other people that understand it the way that I do, that would go along with the same system? So it's that would be more of a faith system that you have checked out, that is solid, that you want. So you don't just blindly go in and say, this is what I believe. You have to know why you believe it. What is it based on? What is your faith based in and on?
So for many people, as Judy was saying, it's a blind faith.
Yeah.
It is just something that I believe, I haven't thought through, and it's okay by me. But I know in my own life, what has been really critical is to be able to analyze and to check and to recheck and to test my faith in the scriptures, in Christ as being my Lord and Savior, the various aspects of Christian doctrine there. So I really believe that faith, when it is true faith, when it's authentic faith, is like a solid slab. It is thick, it is wide, and it is deep. And you are not easily dislodged from that. The difficulty is that most individuals do not have a kind of faith system that will support them in that kind of way. It's like being up on a balancing beam where the earth shakes a little bit, somebody runs by you fast, the balancing beam is shaken a little bit, and you fall right off, and then you're struggling. So this is something that is very, very important as the very foundation upon which to begin to understand what it is that I'm heading into. You don't want to just replace Christian Science with something that does not fit knowledge, it does not fit the assent that you believe it to be true, and it also does not elicit any kind of trust on your part. So, change your thinking, change your brain. If you've been in one of our support groups, you know that we've talked a lot about the neurobiology, and that is absolutely the case. So some of the ways in which in the past people's lives were changed or their brains were changed early on in the 1800s, Bayer Pharmaceuticals, they used to sell at this point heroin for a cough. That would be something that indeed would change your brain there, but it would take away your headache as well.
Or your cough.
Or your cough, hopefully. But you can see it right here, heroin. And then they had the ideal brain tonic, Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola actually had coca beans in it when it was first made. It had cocaine. So it says here the ideal brain tonic, specific for headaches. It is delightful summer and wintertime beverage, and it relieves
mental and physical exhaustion.
So it is a wonderful thing in order to have. Well, that's not what we're talking about here.
So again, just to go back a little bit and review aspects of the Christian Science worldview, the entire material world is unreal, illusory. Matter has no real existence even in the mind. It is an illusion held by an illusion, mortal mind. The senses are deceitful and false, and the only sources of evil and error. Sin and evil are no thing, unreal and delusion. Suffering, disease, and death are illusory, and only appear to exist due to the lack of faith. True faith eliminates pain, suffering, and death.
So this is Christian Science. This worldview damnably changes the brain. It rewires it. If you come into it later in life, if you were born and raised in it, then it actually sets up the wiring. And it is a awful situation to try and to live in reality when having this in your brain, having rewired your neural network. So think of this in terms of indoctrination, the formation of an original worldview. It is something that is just part and parcel of who you are. So there's this little poem here by Oscar Wilde, the poet. But strange that I was not told that the brain can hold in tiny ivory cell God's heaven or hell. But strange that I was not told that the brain can hold in tiny ivory cell God's heaven or hell. This is neurobiology, men and women. And it is either for good or for ill.
Introduction to the mind and body connection. The mind and the body are intimately connected with one another. Understanding some basic neurobiology can help you understand that your brain is not the real you. The brain is an organ that houses the real you. Your brain is constantly being wired and rewired by the environment around you. This began in utero. If that environment is a healthy environment, love, support, care, etc., your brain adapts positively to this.
So, where we are saying here that understanding some basic neurobiology can be helpful because your brain is not the real you. The real you is housed by your brain. It's just an organ of your body. And this might be somewhat confusing with Christian Science because Christian Science, too, would say that the real you is not in mortal flesh. In fact, because mortal flesh does not really exist. That's operating in mortal mind. But so there is an element of truth to recognizing that my mind, who I am, is not my brain. But that does not mean that my brain is not real. In the same way that my heart is not real, or this door is not real, or this chair that I'm sitting on is not real. The point is that your brain just houses who you are. Now, it doesn't go to the extent that Christian Science talked about it, that the brain doesn't even actually exist in God's mind. So your brain being constantly rewired and wired by the environment around you is a huge factor. Even as you're watching us now, your brain is being rewired, either negatively or positively, by what you were hearing. That happens to all of us, every single minute of every day that we're conscious. We're changing internally.
Once a person leaves a cult, their brain is still wired for surviving in that cultic environment. It's what the pathways that you've laid down are the ones that you continue to go down.
So just leaving the group
It
doesn't
doesn't change
it
that.
doesn't change the wiring.
If the environment was a negative environment, life in CS, your brain adapts negatively. It adapts to survive. This is number 6. This is why a person reacts to triggers, things that cause you to remember or to react to different things. First comes the bodily reaction, and then the cognition. Then you begin to realize, oh, this is reminding me of something that happened when I was younger, or something that I've been thinking as a consequence of being in CS. This is why a person can often feel that there is a war going on inside. They struggle to understand their behavior.
Now this happens to all of us to a certain extent. You know, there is the you that reacts to something at times, and afterwards, when you settle down, you begin to think, why did I act like that? What is wrong? What's going on? Well, there's sometimes with individuals, particularly ones who have been really traumatized, their brains get wired easily to look for some kind of danger. And as a consequence of that, when something appears to be dangerous to them, then they can go into kind of a fight or flight response. They're either going to duke it out with you or they're just going to run away and avoid in this instance. But then afterwards, when things settle down, they might say, why did I do that? It wasn't really a dangerous situation. Why did I respond like that? So there's some naturalness to that for all of us. But when you've come out of a group like CS, then that war can become immense, because it's not just I'm reacting in negative ways to that kind of surprise me by what I am experiencing in the moment, but rather it's I'm at war with whether reality even exists or not, whether the material universe is actual, whether the stars that I see in the sky are real. All of these things create this kind of internal struggle that's going on. So the point is that understanding basic neurobiology gives a hard science understanding as to why trauma therapy is so crucial for multi-generational adults. Why it's so crucial. It helps to reinforce that there is nothing wrong with you. You sit down, you talk with somebody that understands CS, that understands thought reform and coming out of a group like CS, and they will be able to give you an outside perspective that you need in order to try and reinforce what it is that you can do to change that, because you can't change what you don't understand. So hopefully the person that you're talking to is going to be able to give you strategies and help you along those lines, things that you haven't thought about. Second, so as I was saying, you can't change what you don't understand. And then thirdly, as you think, so you are. As you think, so you are.
That's when it gets a little confusing with CS, because, again, that was sort of the message that you were given there. But this means something completely different. You are in control of your thoughts. And again, I think that was one of the things that was taught. But you use them to change the patterns of your life in a healthy way. And I think that the beginning, the kind of therapy that's needed will take you back to the beginning and help you to determine who you really are, your personality style, working with that, and then recognizing that there's nothing wrong with you, that something happened to you, and then you go through this process. But you can change your thoughts systematically. You can change the way that you talk to yourself, the things that you believe. You can change those. You don't need to listen to somebody else. In the past, it wasn't your mind you were changing. It was you were adopting the mind of CS. You were imbibing on that particular thought process. They weren't your own thoughts. And now you've got the opportunity at this stage to change your thoughts with your own thoughts, newer thoughts.
And so think about it like this. There is a reality to how we think and how that changes us. Only in CS, what you are doing is you are denying that the material universe actually exists. And so you believe, and if you press this too far, you're going to have problems, but you can say to yourself, okay, that wall is really not there. I can just walk right through that and I will be fine. Now, that's not going to work because
It's not true.
no matter what you say, you cannot change your mind enough to make that a reality. But you can in terms of saying, okay, that wall is real. Every time I try and run through it, I end up injuring myself. Therefore, that wall
Is real.
is something that is real. And you begin to wire your brain along those lines. That was in some of the quotes that we were looking at, where the individual is saying, my goodness, I can see the sky, I can see my hand, it's real, I can enjoy these things, rather than saying, well, this doesn't really exist. But then I break my arm, which doesn't exist, and I've got pain. So you make your thoughts in line with the reality
That's
that
right.
we live within. That's the critical factor.
So when you change your brain, you rewire your brain with facts, with truth, rather than with a lie. You've been wiring your brain all your life with a lie. Now comes the reformation of all of that. And this is the process that you can go through. So we're gonna go through some of those steps eventually.
So we read in Romans, Paul writes, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Then you will be able to prove, you will be able to demonstrate what is reality, is what's
That's
being
right,
said
that's right.
here in this. So there are 7 brain rules, and we want to take a little bit of time now and talk about this because this still deals with changing your brain or changing your mind in order to change your brain. So these are 7 brain rules here that are necessary.
Tenet number 1, change can only occur when the brain is in the mood. And you say to yourself, well, what is that supposed to mean? How do I get my brain in the mood? All that means is that you're going to cooperate with the process. You want to change. You all have left. You don't believe that any of the CS stuff anymore, but it's still rolling around in your brain. You want to get it out of there. So now you say, I consciously make this choice. I want to be able to do this. And it's going to be difficult, but it's doable. So you put your brain technically in the mood to do this by cooperating.
Your neurobiology is like a map, and you can look at it like, say, the state of Massachusetts, where we are broadcasting this from right now, recording this. If you are up around 50 miles high, you might be able to see some major highways that exist on the landscape. Now, the closer you get, the more you are able to see detail, and the more you're able to see little entrance ways onto the highways, exit ramps on the highways. You begin to see small, detailed roads, minor ones. Eventually, you can get to the point where you see driveways and alleys. Your brain, to a large extent, has been wired with superhighways. And what you have got to do in rewiring your brain is you've got to intentionally choose to go down a different way than what you normally do in order to get from point A to point B. This changes your neurobiology. Now, the problem with CS and with many other groups is that you come out of that environment and you've got superhighways that are highways to hell. They are very unpleasant when you're on them. So change only occurs when the brain is in the mood. Point being that you have to be intent, you have to want to do this. You might not like it. It's hard. But having said that, that is when the brain can actually begin to change. It's like learning to do something new. So then the second tenet is change strengthens connections between neurons engaged at the same time. This is just recognizing that if I touch something that is hot and I feel pain and I see that what I'm touching is red hot, then my vision of something that is red and very hot is going to be connected to the pain that I'm feeling in my hand being singed. So this is involving a lot of neuron activity in my brain that then becomes more wired together.
And the more often you do that, then the more often it's going to get more solid.
It's going to get more solid. So, or it's going to wire negatively. If I learn early on that red hot stove, hand on stove is painful, then I recognize that this is not a good thing. And so I don't even look at that as something that I want to put my hand on there. But those neurons are wired together, either for good or for ill. So it just strengthens the connections when something happens in time where we are involving multiple senses.
Tenet number 3, neurons that fire together wire together. That's a similar to tenet number 2, but part of this is the way that you talk to yourself as well. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah, the changing, where tenet 2, where your change strengthens connections, in tenet 3, if they're firing together all the time, then they really wire together. That's what I mean by a highway to hell. You might have different side roads that you can go down that are problematic at times, or either that or are good. But when those neurons, when they're firing together all the time, then that builds that highway wider and wider and wider. And it becomes something either for good or for ill.
Initial changes are just temporary. So it's not something that happens quickly. You have to keep repeating them in order to make it a permanent change.
You can think about this in terms of software. If you're ever trying to learn a software, and it seems that this is a perpetual highway to hell in many respects, the software is changing all the time. So you learn one software, and all of a sudden you have to, there's an upgrade, and there's a relearning curve. And so what you remember about what worked there isn't going to work as well now, because it's not the same operating system in the ways that the old one was. So it's something that is just temporary as things continue to change and shift. But if something stays permanent, if you're doing the same thing again and again and again, then the changes, they will become more solid. But initially when you're learning something, it's just temporary. It's not something that is going to be remembered next time that you come to it necessarily. So you need to practice. That's the whole point of this, is practice.
Brain plasticity is a two-way street, and we can either drive change positively or negatively. You've already covered that somewhat.
Yeah, just means that we have good habits and bad habits. A habit is a neural network that has been laid down for good or for ill. If my habit is to brush my teeth every morning, then that is a good habit, because it not only benefits me, but it's something that makes me feel better when I've done it. If beating the dog is a habit, then that is something that is going to be more negative, because my next door neighbor might hear the dog howling, and then I'm going to jail because they're calling the Animal Rescue League on me. So habits can be done either negatively or positively. Drug addiction, to a certain extent, starts out as a habit that really wires the brain in a way that is highly, highly destructive, because it's not just something you do again and again. It actually creates a physiological need for something to occur in order for you to feel good. The memory is crucial for learning. Now, what we mean by this is that you develop a history. If you can look back and say, okay, I'm not where I was 5 years ago. Now, I don't really like where I'm at now. I'm still really struggling, but I can see there's been progress. This means that your brain is changing. So you need to have that kind of memory as an encouragement to you, that things are changing as you move ahead there. And it's crucial for continuing to learn.
And number 7, motivation is key factor in brain plasticity. The fact that the brain can change, that's what brain plasticity is. And it's the only organ in your body that can change even till the day that you die, no matter how old you are. But you have to be motivated. It keys into the tenet before, I think it's 2 or 3, that says that number 1, you have to be in the mood. Your brain has to be in the mood. That's motivation. You have to want to do this. And the more that you're motivated, the more that you will stay persistent in your pursuit of changing your brain. And once you get onto the new pathway and it's developed, and as long as you keep functioning that way, then the highway, as Bob described it, will stay wide and passable.
So the motivation here, this kind of builds momentum as time goes on. You are working on it. You are practicing certain things. You're recognizing that you need to be in a situation where the neurons are constantly firing together.
Right.
And what ends up happening is you begin to see changes, you develop a history, and that motivates you even more. It creates a certain physiological response in the brain that produces certain endorphins and a feeling of well-being because, look, I'm changing here. The other thing is that, as Judy was saying, brain plasticity, what that essentially means is that you can change the physical structure of your brain by how you think. It is the only organ in the body that you can do that with. You cannot change your heart by how you think. You can't change your stomach, your intestines. You can't change a limb by how you think. You can change the architecture of your brain, particularly internally, by how you think and what you say and what it is that you believe. So now we want to look at 5 questions for challenging mistaken beliefs. There's some 5, you've got these CS beliefs that are rolling around in your head. You keep falling back into the same patterns. Well, this is just one little strategy that you might use. And there's going to be a handout that FFCS will make available to you folk who have attended the seminar here that we're going to give.
So understand that challenging mistaken beliefs, basically what you're doing is rewiring your brain. You're changing a belief that you've had maybe all your life, and you realize now that it's wrong, that it's not the one that you want, that you would have chosen. And so now you've decided, you're in the mood, you're going to change your brain, and you have to rewire it with the right thinking, the one that you do want to have. And it's a process.
So just to kind of review, this is where the struggle lies for individuals that come out of CS in particular, but any group. One, it's difficult to trust yourself. It results in feelings of guilt and shame, needing to forgive yourself at times for the way that you've maybe acted, and needing to forgive in trusting, in dealing with others, and maybe you have not always been as you would want to have been with them. So it's difficult to trust yourself. Secondly, difficult to trust any authority. This results in feelings of condemnation from God. You read the Bible and you just feel that it's only condemning. Churches are places of abuse. And then trusting others results in suspicion, paranoia, anger, isolation, and withdrawal. So the person that comes out of a group like CS really feels isolated. Nobody understands. And these are the usual symptoms that you find in every group, but they can be really intensified in coming out of Christian Science. So you want to ask yourself these following questions. First off, what is the evidence for this belief? Now, we're not talking about CS in the large package, but aspects of it that have been problematic for you, whether it is in grieving, allowing yourself to feel pain, acknowledging that you feel that you can go to a doctor. These are all minor aspects of a much larger system. And not everyone is going to have the same ones that they struggle with. So looking objectively at all of your life experience, what is the evidence that this is true? I put my hand on the stove and it gets burned. CS tells me that no, I didn't really get burned there. That's just mortal mind. Well, what is the evidence that that's just mortal mind other than the fact that Mary Baker Eddy made up this and said so?
That's right.
What is my experience?
That's right. When you have a burn on your hand, that's the evidence. It's real. You can see it and touch it.
Ask yourself this, if you'd never been involved in Christian Science, would you still accept this belief and worldview? Would you still think that, or would you have ever come up with, yeah, I put my hand on that stove and it got burned, but it's not real? Is that something that you would have embraced? Or is it something that came out of that belief system?
Does this belief invariably or always hold true for me? And again, it's using the same silly example. You're not going to test that out 15 times in a row. After the first couple of times, you're going to say, wait a minute, 2 or 3 times is more than I need to prove to me that this happens all the time. But that would work even for thinking about ideas about your own person, or if you believe that people don't find you acceptable. Does this work out? Does this hold true, even when somebody is saying kind things to you? You don't deny that. You don't say, "Well, I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect enough. People shouldn't be saying those kind of things to me." So it's even in the way that you approach something that's more philosophical in nature.
Yeah, and that's a critical thing, because normally we are not going to hold on to a belief that doesn't play out all the time, that causes all kind of issues because I thought one thing, but something else happens. So questioning any Christian Science belief, any subsystem, is it invariably that it always holds true for you? Then thirdly, does this belief consider the whole picture? Does it take into account both positive and negative consequences? Well, you can say that CS indeed takes into account positive and negative consequences from Mary Baker Eddy's point of view, because the material universe isn't real, and the only reason you feel pain is because that's a negative consequence of you not holding that worldview. But that doesn't fit the first point here, that this is evidence that this is always the case. There is no evidence. The evidence that you've got, in fact, you have contrary evidence. You're in pain. So you need to look at the whole picture. Does this system hold together? Does it answer the feelings that I have when my husband or my wife dies and I'm grieving, or a child dies? Does it answer that in a way that works? Does it take into account both the positive and negative consequences? The negative consequences being in a situation where a loved one dies, that I'm not really feeling this. That's a negative consequence there, that because you really are. And so it is invalidating what your experience is.
So number 4, does this belief promote my well-being and or peace of mind? Obviously, it doesn't. You challenging this is a little, it's unnerving, but in reality, your peace of mind comes from knowing what is true.
Absolutely the case. And then number 5, did I choose this belief on my own? Or did it develop out of my experience of growing up in my family? Now, being multi-generational, somebody in your family history did choose this. This was not something that they were imbued with, because that's what they grew up in. But multi-generational, this is not something that I chose on my own. I might keep it, I might decide that I'm going to maintain it and own it, but anyone who's born and raised in a group, that is strictly by default, that belief system is operating inside. So you need to ask yourself, did I choose this, or did it develop out of my experience of growing up in my family from Christian Science? If you reject Christian Science, then obviously it's not something you chose, and you can look for what is reality.
It's always helpful to have somebody else that can help you to answer these questions from an outside perspective rather than just looking internally, because sometimes it's hard to answer these kinds of questions. That's why going for therapy too will be helpful.
This is a great little statement. Your mind is a garden, your thoughts are seeds. You can grow flowers or you can grow weeds. Life after Christian Science. There's life after Christian Science, so says someone on the XCS site, and it's wonderful. This material world is good, it's bad, and it's everything in between. It's so liberating to not have to deny any of it. And then I keep reminding myself that God made physical creation and he loved everything he made. He kept saying, behold, it is very good. The real Jesus came to affirm and embrace human life and to feel all of it with us. If you look hard, you can find some people in any town who know the real affirming Jesus, who was a real man with a real body. May you find happiness and enjoy having a body. This is good news, the ex-Christian Scientist here is describing. So you want to line up your self-image with God's image of you, because that is reality. What does He say? Your self-image has been greatly shaped predominantly by the message that you received from Christian Science and internalized from others, family, friends, experiences, your own self-talk where you reinforce this. So when you were a child, you did not have control of those in authority over you, but while in Christian Science, you may not have had control either, but since you are an adult, you are out of the group, and that is no longer the case. You are now able to choose those with whom you associate, and you can certainly control your self-talk. Therefore, you can take an active part in changing the distorted view you have of your own person. So as a man thinks, so he is. Proverbs 23:7. So there are 4 steps that you need to take to move forward in pursuing faith.
The 4 steps to freedom. First, assume that the confusion, fear, and distress you are feeling has been triggered by something in the present, but is connected to being raised in Christian Science. So when you have a distressing feeling, you can say, something's happening now that is happening in the present, but it's reminding me of something from Christian Science. It's being raised by my connection to Christian Science. The second is connect the confusion, fear, and distress that has its roots in your formative years in Christian Science by noticing where they fit in your life narrative. It's not always easy. And again, this is when it's helpful to talk to someone else. But try to think through, where could this be coming from? What idea in Christian Science, or what person, or what part of the system could be bringing this on? Next, identify the internalized Christian Science beliefs that developed as a result of being raised in that environment. And then lastly, challenge the old Christian Science programs so that you can create the new beliefs needed to live in today's reality. And that goes back to the brain fitness piece that we were talking about earlier. Then you start using self-talk that is going to say, no, this belief is wrong.
So essentially what you're doing is you're being very diagnostic.
Right.
You're looking at where things come specifically. If you're experiencing something in the present, sometimes you can connect the dots to the past and you know where this is coming from. But there are a lot of times when you might feel something in the present where you can't connect the dots. The point here is that something in the past happened that is now leaching into the present.
That's right.
That is causing you to feel the way that you do. So this is where you connect the confusion with this. You identify what that internalized belief is. It might take you some time to think through it. And then you challenge that old belief with the things that we've already spoken about.
No, we're not saying these things happen one right after the other. This is a process that you have to go through. And again, having a counselor that you can trust and also that understands all of this, plus even being involved in a support group, because these are the kinds of things
You'll
that you
hear
talk
others.
about. That's right.
You'll hear others say the same thing. So recovering faith after Christian Science. Now we want to look at some preliminary considerations. Some of the following slides come from a woman, Ruth, I forget what her name is. Yeah, June Hunt. June Hunt. It comes from a booklet that we've got from June Hunt. First off, I know that after I leave, savage wolves will come in among you and will not spare the flock. Even from your own number, men will arise and distort the truth in order to draw away the disciples after them. So you need to be on your guard. And this is what Christian Science has been all about. It is a wolf that came in and changed things drastically. So some of the necessary considerations for those born and raised in Christian Science. It's critical to understand that that you understand Christian Science through the Bible and not the Bible through Christian Science. Like many Bible-based cults, the Bible is not the true authority. The writings of Mary Baker Eddy are the authority. So we would encourage you to use conservative Bible commentaries. These are books that explain Bible verses that you might not understand from a scholar's point of view. And there are many good ones. Look for a conservative Bible dictionary, a Bible dictionary that defines various words. It's also critical that the scientific statement of being that everyone in CS grows up in hearing over and over and over again is replaced with one of the historic creeds of the church. That would be our suggestion. Both the creeds of the church, like the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed, and the scientific statement of being, these are worldviews. They are not just some small thing. They really present a way to look at reality. So this is a necessary step to rewire your neural network. As a man thinks, so he is. So you can memorize these. It can be helpful to study and read about heresy in the early church and how those issues were worked out, how the early church dealt with what is called Gnosticism, the kind of shtick, philosophical assumptions that Mary Baker Eddy came up with, because there is nothing new under the sun. This is all rehashed. It is all in modern clothing for the unsuspecting victim. So you can see how they dealt with it. Also, the Bible is not just a collection of verses. There's a system, a theology that helps understand Christian doctrine in a topical and a holistic way. So you can look at what's called a systematic theology. Wayne Grudem put together an excellent one there. And then attend a Bible study at church or with a small group that can help you to begin to ask questions and get them answered.
For as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is. That's Proverbs 23:7. He that will not command his thoughts will soon lose the command of his actions.
Thomas Wilson. How true that is. So we're going to finish up with this quote, spoken by a former member of a different group. I know many who are still hurting even after many years out. Trust is crucial. Not only trusting others, but even more, it's difficult to trust yourself. Everything, feelings, decision-making, discernment capacity, even your own senses. Upon what basis now do we trust? Do we have faith? After being so sure for so long that this was absolutely without a hint of a whisper of an innuendo of doubt, and then to find out not only was it not it, but in fact was deadly. To be so deceived on so decisive an issue, you become a little shy. Many find other former members to buddy up with, and that is very helpful. It's easier to trust. It doesn't matter what group or class of group. All high command groups are in a smorgasbord of flavors, as I'm sure that you know. But the victimization process is nonetheless similar, and so is the recovery. So we're going to hand out to you, Katie will have some 9 truths. It's a little packet of material that we'll have online that speak about biblically, from God's point of view, things that can help you to embrace a faith system in a way that is real, that is demonstratable, and that fits your experience and reality. So we want to thank you very much for coming to this last session, and we'll have some time for questions here. Thank you for coming.